one thing which was always ingrained in me was understand the business first, understand the customer first, understand how that customer makes a decision to work with you or not. If you can't solve for that as an outcome through your people, you can have the most delighted people on earth, but they are not going to be able to deliver on what they need to.
Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by someone at the forefront of HR leadership in South Africa, Deb Fuller, Group Executive for Human Resources at Nedbank, the Chief People Officer, with a career spanning continents, sectors, decades. And, obviously, we've seen a big shift in terms of the way we work. Deb brings both wisdom and heart to the conversation around transformation, inclusion, and the future of work and AI. So get ready. Today's theme is around from DEI to AI and why human is still key to the success. So welcome, Deb.
Thanks, Ralf. Look, I'm a South African, first and foremost, born and bred, grew up in Johannesburg, and grew up, I suppose, at a time where there was no such thing really as career guidance, or certainly if there was, it was very limited. Fell into a career, leaving university, having a bachelor's, or in fact, a bachelor's in social science, focused on industrial psychology and industrial sociology. I think at the time I would have been able to tell you what were all the things I didn't want to do in my career more than what I wanted to. But I wanted to work with people and I wanted to work in business. And I think what for me was probably the most interesting was in the formative part of my career where I started out initially in consulting, and then I spent several years with Deloitte before going overseas to GE, was where my passion for what I do was probably really unlocked, because I am probably what I would describe as a business leader first, human capital second type individual that has passion for unlocking potential in organizations. That's ultimately what I am all about and what makes me tick. I think what is probably the most interesting is that I spent 11 years of my career with the General Electric company, living and working out of London and in Europe, which was amazing. At a very interesting time, predominantly with GE Capital, and doing some really interesting things, all the way from lots of M&A transactions, so buying and acquiring and integrating organizations, some successfully, some not so, changing organizations. I built a bank from the ground up. I was employee number 3, if you can believe that. And that was 3 years prior to the financial crisis. So I've got loads of stories in that regard. But ultimately was really about tapping into getting the best out of our colleagues. And that was just really what has been a core to my career. I spent time when I returned to South Africa. I did so with the lens on a bit of an experiment. My husband and I believed that what human capital and the way it was practiced in South Africa was just not done the way I had approached it for predominantly the majority of my career to that point. I was probably wrong and maybe a little arrogant, if I'm really honest. But coming back to South Africa, stepping into banking in South Africa, yes, to a large extent, a little bit archaic and a little bit backwards, certainly coming from what was at the time working for one of the, anywhere from number 1 to number 3 in the most admired companies to work for in the world, as GE was at the time. Coming back to banking in South Africa, where I've now been for 14 years, has been an amazing journey, actually, realizing that while, at the end of the day, humans are humans, banks or organizations are all motivated by the same thing, which is to succeed, to compete and outperform one another. And human capital is such an integral part of getting it right or getting it wholly wrong. So that's been a big part of what I've been doing for the last 14 years. And I'm very privileged to have been with Nedbank now, somewhere between 6 and 7 years, which has been a really amazing journey. And again, starting from some quite backward practice to where hopefully we are today, which is on the front foot of making strides in technology and people, and helping us to be a highly competitive organization. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, and I saw that you were nominated for one of the CHRO Leaders of the Year last year as well. So you're right up there with South Africa's best. I mean, there's so many things to discuss based on what you said, but business leader first. When did you make that decision, and how does it impact your role when you make that distinction?
Ralf, that's actually a great question. I think in essence, probably I made the decision unconsciously all the way back at university. I remember at the time, as I say, getting really weak career guidance and somebody saying to me, well, you like people, just go and work with people, and HR is what you should be doing. But I was so dissatisfied by that as an answer. I was like, that's pathetic. That's not what I'm all about. To what end, right? I might like people, but to what end? And the reality is that what we all need to solve for in the human capital space is actually about unlocking human potential and enabling organizations to thrive, right? Because that's ultimately, we have a shareholder, we've got a share price that needs to perform, we've got a customer that needs to be delighted in order for that share price to perform. So whether people like working in your organization or not is surely can't be the be-all and end-all. The be-all and end-all is to unlock their passion, their engagement, their commitment to winning outcomes, and then bring them their best selves to work. And I think I had the benefit of growing up, for the most part, in my career in the General Electric company, which was very progressive in its day. But one thing which was always ingrained in me was understand the business first, understand the customer first, understand how that customer makes a decision to work with you or not. If you can't solve for that as an outcome through your people, you can have the most delighted people on earth, but they are not going to be able to deliver on what they need to. So it's been somewhat of an evolution in my own career. And as I say, today, I live by that. It is incredibly important to understand your market. It's incredibly important to understand the consumer on this continent, and what they look for out of a bank, because ultimately everyone has choices. So that remains something which I'm very curious around, and is central to how I focus on how we try and grow our people, and how we make sure that we create the link between what we expect from them to do and what they ultimately spend their time doing in their days, so that we can ultimately get them to be the objects of a winning outcome.
And how hard is that?
Pretty hard. Yeah, pretty hard, right? Because it all comes down to motivation, right? At the end of the day, that's what this is all about. Ralf, it's all about tapping in to the human and getting them psychologically committed to what they're needing to be doing, and understanding the connection between what it is that they do and the outcome that we seek. So it's not impossible, but it's certainly something which you work hard, you work at continuously.
Yeah. And I mean, there's that thinking that you can't motivate someone, they can only motivate themselves.
Correct. Very much so.
And so, then you start thinking about the HR practices in terms of the onboarding or the attraction side of things. How hard is that? And how do you make sure you get those people? Like, because people can say whatever they want in an interview.
Spot on, right? Yeah, look, I think the reality, Ralf, is that what you've got to be incredibly care about is who you are as an organization and what you stand for, right? So I think that part of what we need to solve for is ensuring that you first as an organization are very clear what that identity is and what you're selling. Because if you aren't clear on that, I think that people can see straight through it, right? So it is about ensuring that you have a very clear definition of what it is that makes the organization tick. what you want to stand for, how you make decisions, what is at the core and the essence of what that your organization is. And in our case, that's our purpose and our values, right? And I think if I were to just draw a contrast between, again, my experience at GE, which was a phenomenal experience. I think I speak about my experience at GE as such a shaping experience in my career, because not just because of the accolades of Forbes Fortune 500's ratings of it as an organization, but because the lived experience was one which has really has left a deep mark in me. But also because I find something similar at Nedbank. Nedbank is the organization which is pretty humble. It's probably a lot more humble than GE was, although GE had it at its core was such a progressive organization, deeply purpose and values driven. And I find that in this organization. So it is valuable to be able to be in an environment where the definition of who we are and what we stand for is at our core. While we're deeply humble, that's actually the core of our confidence. So we understand, we know we're quite true to ourselves, and with that comes humility. But it is about ensuring that you are selling to the next employer, the future employer. What is that lived experience going to be in working here? Because the nature of the work that you do from one financial institution to another can often be largely comparable. So how do you stand out in the crowd is actually less in the nature of what people do, but is important to creating the link between what it is that the individual is going to do and the purpose of the organization, if that resonates. Now, it resonates with a huge amount of the youth and young talent today who are much more purpose-led, looking for so much more than just a job, right? So that's definitely a big influence in that decision-making, and therefore tapping into what that lived experience will be. And so what has been, I think, what is a phenomenal secret weapon for Nedbank is our culture and that lived experience. We have a lot of our workforce, and I've seen it, having worked in many places, people always think that the grass is greener on the other side. They think that they're going to go somewhere, but we have a phenomenally high proportion of our workforce that leave Nedbank and then actually ask to rejoin, right? So that's probably one of the most pronounced unique differences in our environment, and a testament to the unique selling point of our culture. And equally, it's something which enables a lot of it's core to how we attract our talent, right? So selling that experience and making it linked into who we are and what we stand for. So you've obviously got to work hard to make sure that is the lived experience, because it's not just words on a wall or statements on a website, but actually is something which manifests in a day-to-day experience, because people will catch you out very quickly if it's inauthentic. But it is incredibly important to find that ability to articulate who it is and what you stand for, what is that value proposition, and then fulfill in it, which unlocks the potential and the performance I find in colleagues. It certainly isn't the whole answer, but certainly that is a very good foundation from which you can then start.
And I mean, you spoke about purpose and building your purpose and people aligning to it. And I think that's true. I think people do. And I think most organizations and both leaders know that purpose is important. And there's obviously books like by Simon Sinek's Start With Why, and, how to find your purpose, both for a business and an individual. I mean, you also spoke about when you were with GE, you started a small bank, initially startup. If you were going to do it again and you had to join another organization, what would your fundamentals be to putting in a good purpose for an organization? What should other business leaders be looking at when developing a good purpose?
Look, the reality is that, first of all, purpose is so deeply personal, right? I think what is so pronounced, and I'm going to keep drawing a parallel to what I find at Nedbank. Nedbank is known as the green bank, right? And it's not just in color. I remember when I was being interviewed, somebody asked me, so why would you want to join Nedbank? And I was like, well, it resonates with me from in terms of, it's an organization that on the face of it saves rhinos and does good, etc. But I think what is incredibly important is to define what that purpose is, right? And the articulation thereof. I've worked in several organizations that have declared a purpose, but not lived it. So if I was going to start an organization from scratch again, I think it is about ensuring that you are clear what that purpose is and why. And it cannot be a copy paste. It just can't. It's got to be something which is so deeply ingrained that it is leader-led and it drives the way you make decisions, the choices you make, how you lead your organization. It's got to live every single day, because if it doesn't, it becomes words on a wall. And I've certainly experienced organizations where it is exactly that. So it is about that journey of exploration in defining what that purpose is. And so, what is interesting is, so I joined Nedbank after we had defined our purpose, and it was something that resonated with me. But I, even on the face of it, in considering this as a future employer, I didn't really fully appreciate what it meant. I think what I've loved about working in it today is that it is so much more than words. It is about how it comes back to who we are, right? And it's about how we talk about ourselves and how, and that is something which I would say that every single day our purpose lives out. I could give you examples from every week and probably every day where that purpose is tested. And therefore coming back to it and being, if you want to be a purpose-led organization authentically, you've got to be prepared to stand by it to the deepest level and be able to do so in the face of a challenge, in the face of the competitors going in a different direction, foregoing revenue in the context of what that purpose is. I mean, it's got to be deeply felt. Otherwise, frankly, it's not. I'd far rather organizations either don't attach themselves to a deep purpose. If their purpose is revenue generation at all costs, then say that, right? But be clear what it is what you want to stand for. And then I think you've got to ensure that you surround yourself with people that are prepared to go to war for that purpose. Because if you can do that, you're going to give it a chance of living and breathing. If you don't, it's inauthentic, and frankly, it's just noise. And I think there is a lot of noise out there in a lot of organizations. And I think I'd say to people, at its core, choose not to be something. If you don't attach yourself to words that don't resonate, that don't enable you to be that authentic self. I think that's incredibly important.
I mean, you spoke earlier about your time at GE, and I'm fascinated because I read Jack Welch's book, and I followed them, and the training they did, the development of their team, the innovations, the way they led sectors, either one or two in each sector. I mean, it sounded like a phenomenal organization.
It was,
and
truly.
And I think, and like one of the world's best companies, and so we've lost the talent in South Africa to a big organization in the UK, and I think we're bleeding talent all over the place. I've got young children who are job seeking in there. 2 of them are overseas at the moment. But you came back, and I suppose what's interesting is you went and worked and led a great organization, and then you came back and you thought you were going to change things here, but then you said you got that wrong. And we try and take what we've learned overseas and bring it here. What's the message there? Because also as a media company, I often look outside, and I see a lot of great leaders do look outside and look at what's happening in Europe and the trends there, and they sort of do flow through. So you could be a little bit of a futurist by just looking at the future, but it doesn't quite work that way, does it?
Yeah, look, I think the reality is that as an individual, you've got to resonate with with what you're solving for, right? And for me, the choice to come back to South Africa and to pursue a career in human capital in this context was something which I made peace with the fact that what I did at GE wasn't necessarily going to be the same that I would do elsewhere. And I think that was part of the decision to come back. There are huge advantages from being in environments where large, organizations on the international stage are very attractive employers. And don't get me wrong, I love what you described, GE. I could talk about it all day. It was a phenomenal experience, not just because of what it stood for as an organization, but the quality of the people that I have in my network that I worked with on a day-to-day basis, who've all gone on to do amazing things and to export their skills elsewhere. I think what is certainly was for me very important was ensuring that I knew why I was leaving and what I was coming back to South Africa to do, and then making a commitment to what that would mean for my career. And I made peace with that. I think similarly, what was incredibly important for me when I came back to South Africa was the importance of what legacy I wanted to leave behind. Having grown up in this country, I left South Africa at the end of sort of late 1999. 5 years into a democracy, or the democracy as we describe it today, and certainly the country that I came back to 11 years later was not the country I left behind. But it was a country that I wanted to come and explore. We came on a bit of an experiment. As I say, for 2 years, I made that deal with my husband. I was like, we're not selling our house. We're just going to go back and see it and give it a try. And we're still here. And that's what I will say is important to those that, because we have this massive brain drain, you have to be clear why you go. So I never left South Africa because I didn't believe in it as a country. I left South Africa because I was working 6 days a week. I had a seriously exciting role at Deloitte at the time, but I was working, I had no work-life balance. And every single time I got on an airplane, I either went to an African country because that was part of my portfolio, but whenever I had to get on an airplane to go to our global headquarters, it was a very long flight with some refueling on the way to New York. And the point is that at the time I was pursuing a different market. I was young, I was ambitious, and I'd been successful in my late 20s and wanted to get some diverse experience. And I wasn't sure where to from that at Deloitte. And so hence pursued an opportunity in the UK with GE at the time. What I'm getting at is you've got to be clear why you go, but you also for anywhere, right? And the pursuit of coming back to South Africa, I did probably, if I'm really honest, I did so more so for my husband and my son, because we have family here, and that's. But I was very clear. It's a 2-year experiment, and yet have stayed because it has resonated, the opportunities where South Africa is and the good I can do in my role was something which I found a deep connection to. And if you dialed back 14 years ago and you looked at my LinkedIn profile, which I really haven't looked at probably much in the last 10 or 12 years. I've been
looking a lot at it.
But in essence, Ralf, what I would tell you that would be the same thing that in who is Deb Fuller and what does she stand for back then and what it is today was all about ensuring that I was giving back to this country and ensuring that I enabled through my work the ability for organizations to transform. That was incredibly important. I think having been the product of a really equal opportunity society, living and working in a US bank or a US financial services organization for the most part of my time at GE. What was incredibly valuable was the fact that I was given, there were level playing fields for me. I was never and really very seldom ever just felt discriminated against because of my gender, my ethnicity, the stamp on my passport. And that really, as I was growing up in my late 20s and 30s, was something which I never took for granted. I having come from the South Africa that I'd grown up in, was very much a clear experience for me of, wow, imagine living in a world where who you are and the color of your skin or your gender or your sexual orientation isn't something which stands against you. And that was important for me. And that's why in my pursuit of work that I've done in the human capital space, if you had to speak to people around me and say, if you had to say, what is one of the most pronounced passions for Deb, is diversity and inclusion, is so core to who I am and what I stand for. It's what I preach at my dinner table at home. It's the values I instill in my kids. It's how we raise them. It's how I think about the work that I do. And it's about creating a level playing field for people. And that is something which has really unlocked a passion for this continent and for this country in particular for me. And it's part of who I am and what I stand for. So my team will tell you that it's something I talk about continuously. It's a thread that runs through my entire people agenda, is about making sure that we are a really equal opportunity employer. And that we do everything we possibly can to ensure that equality and fairness is a principle that lands in our value proposition. So that's been hugely valuable and created a connection for me in this beautiful country that I call home.
For sure. I've got some American friends and they literally hate Trump. And I don't think they're a fan of Musk.
Yeah, I can understand. Yeah.
But I think that there is certainly a new theme around DEI that's been created by both of them in the States. And we spoke earlier about looking to the future, the States, and these sorts of things. How much do you think that's going to impact the South African corporate world? And is that something that we should be taking notice of? Is it something that we should be ignoring because of the brashness of it?
Look, again, I'm going to come back to telling you, I think it comes down to your value set. I think that in the world we live in, I think that many go with the flow and are starting to catch the wave of the anti-woke, this whole sentiment around, well, is equal opportunity really important? Why does diversity matter? We hear everything from the US who, come out with some very strong views on this. And I absolutely believe that it'll have a influence on the South African corporate in some way, shape or form. I think it has to, right? I think it forces you to reevaluate what is important to you, right? And as an organization and as a person, first of all, as somebody who leads this agenda in our environment, I have had to step back and ask myself, what does it mean for me, right? I've been asked by colleagues on live stages, what does it mean? We're seeing changes in labor legislation in South Africa today. And in the redefinition of how we define previously disadvantaged and the evolution of the statistics and what how we will be measured as organizations, what does it mean for us? Well, the reality is actually one's commitment to diversity has got to go a whole way along, a lot further than just numbers, for starters, right? Because if you're ticking a box from a numbers perspective, you are not deeply attached to it as a value. And diversity and the sense of belonging, creating that as for our workforce is incredibly important. It's part of what we stand for and one of our core values. And therefore, actually, what this opportunity has forced me to do is to reevaluate, does that still hold true? And it holds true even more so, to the point that it's such a strong conviction for me. I truly believe that diversity is so much more than just the demographic makeup of your organization and statistics. It is about making sure that you have a representation of your society in which you operate, designing your products, solving for clients. I'll give you an example. At the weekend, I was reading an article about a competitor bank that has done a really interesting partnership with a large South African retailer recently, and it's changing the way it's redefining their value proposition and the way they engage with their banking clients. And I sat there and I thought to myself, gosh, I wish we had been that organization, right? In fact, my big learning was missed opportunity in Nedbank. We should be those people that we're talking about in this example. But let me tell you where I think that would have come from. Women should be designing those solutions. The working mother should be looking at solving for that in that product development. Why? Because for the most part, this is going to sound very sexist, but in most families, women are worrying about putting food on the table for their families, right? They're worrying about what is going to be fed for dinner, right?
Yeah.
And making sure that the floors can be mopped, and that there are, there's soap in the bathroom. The reality is that if you don't have an environment where the diverse makeup of your teams are tapping into the psyche of the consumer, understanding how they're making that decision, you are going to be designing in your own image, right? That's going to lead to bad outcomes. And all I could think to myself in reading that article was, I'm telling you now, they had a bunch of women designing that because that is how they've tapped into, that is a very strong value proposition, which is a testament to the fact that you need to understand your consumer, understand your market, who are the decision makers, and solve for those. So if you understand that, you understand the value of diversity, not just from a moral perspective, but from a commercial perspective. So again, I think that is an important element of thinking about why one would be either committed or not committed to diversity. And I think that the US might live to regret this, right? In years to come, it remains to be seen whether, as in years to come, the extent, what will be when this pendulum, because it swung so extremely, to the right. The question is, to what extent is it? Where is it going to land? And what will be the learnings from that? And I think, if anything, what it does for me is it's really forced us as an organization to decide what is our stance. And we are firmly behind a diverse organization and diverse leadership, diverse decision-making. Why? Because we think it's better for our organization. We think it's better for our society. We frankly think it's better for us. And and as I say, it goes back at its very core to who we are.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to some of the things you mentioned before, which was about your people being close to the customer, which we believe. I mean, we've got a saying that the biggest brains in any organization sits outside the organization. It's the customer. And I think that you also said you can be the person that flows with everything and just changes at the whim. Like if the US is going to change, do we change? Or you can stick to your moral compass. And it's often those that have that belief in what they're doing. I think you said earlier, hope.
Yeah.
And I think it's so true to have the belief and hope is so important to an organization. In terms of your GE experience, I mean, I was wondering what sort of leadership lessons, because it has left a big mark on you, and I can see how inspired you are. Yeah. So, I mean, what are the leadership lessons that you learned from GE that you think you have brought back? Because there's things obviously you haven't brought back, and it's not relevant to South Africa. But what are the things you have brought back that you thought, well, wow, these are learnings either through starting up that new business bank?
Look, Ralf, I mean, I'm going to give you a pretty basic example, but I think it's one which should resonate with everyone, right? And at its core, my message here is around leadership being leadership, first of all, is not position-based. It's a disposition. And I think that is probably something which is, if you can tap into what that means, it actually can be really super empowering, right? Because every single one of us started little people in organizations. But those that I think there are two kinds of mindsets, right? In people, those that take up their agency, and those that don't, right? And I'm going to my silly example, but nevertheless a very very good illustrative one. Was I was working in GE real estate at the time, and our CFO and various other of my male colleagues would refer to the fact that they were doing best practice sharing on a Friday afternoon, and I would be like, well, how can I come, right? I was, never shy to stick my hand up and say, guys, hey, don't forget about me, right? We had a phenomenally great team. And so I was like, well, if you're doing best practice sharing, I'm in, right? Where do I come? What are we doing? What are we talking about? And our CFO at the time laughed and he said to me, Deb, do you play golf, right? Because the best practice sharing wasn't happening in the office, right? It was happening on the golf course. And I was like, of course I don't play golf. You know me, right? You've seen me hack my way around a mashie course very embarrassingly. It was definitely not one of my refined skills. But nevertheless, the point I'm making is it was a lesson for me because it gave me pause to reflect and go, hey, okay, so I get it. There are going to be times where there's a club or there's a group or there's an opportunity that I'm going to miss because I don't have the skills and I would just not going to, but I'm going to miss out on something, right? I'm going to miss out on that opportunity. And so what do? Right?
Yeah.
The reality is the lesson for me was, okay, so if you're not going to be part of that best practice sharing, start your own. Pick it up, right? Do with it. Do with it something. Don't whinge about it. Don't be a victim to the guys are going off to play golf. So what have I done? Started connections with my female colleagues, right? And the reality is, the point I'm illustrating here is that taking agency is incredibly important, and it doesn't require a position to do so. I've got so many examples where I can think of in my career where I've hit tough times, right? I'll give you another example. There was a point in my career where I was a senior member of a very senior team, and I had a colleague who just made a sport out of making every proposal I brought to the table, every single time I opened my mouth to make a contribution, just made it the object of his focus to undermine, cut it down, say no before the proposal was even aired. And it became a bit of an open secret. It's not even a function of the fact that it was not known, right? And it was exhausting, and often very productive because it meant that I had to really sharpen my focus and my sales pitch. I wasn't going to get through on a proposal on something on it had to win its support based on pure merit. But it was an exhausting place to be, and it went on for a length of time that at a certain point, I reached a point where I just went, this is just ridiculous. And as I say, it wasn't like it wasn't known. It wasn't like it wasn't even referred to, right? People knew that it was there. And so what happened? But I also knew that because it had gone on for so long, that the senior leadership that had equally observed it, we're not going to do anything about it. And I had two choices. I could either choose to leave the organization or I could take control of it, and take matters into my own hands. And the reality is, what could I do? I could take matters into my own hands. I could report it to HR. Well, that would have been like reporting it to myself, right? Which was not going to go very far. I could have probably gone to compliance and really made for myself a very awkward situation. And that wasn't what I wanted. I just wanted this combat to come to an end. It was unproductive. And so out of, I think I reached a certain point late one week, and I just sent an email to my boss at the time, and I said, just letting you know, you will have been observing this combat, and I am going to, I'm planning to meet this individual, and I'm going to discuss the impact on myself and my agenda. And I'm just letting you know, because if this doesn't solve it, then I'm going to have to go another route. But at the end of the day, and I got a speedy, probably the fastest email back I've ever received from that individual to say, thanks for letting me know, let us know how it goes. To which I was like, okay, good. At least I've got your attention, but I've got you on notice, because at the end of the day, this is not okay. It's not living by the values. It's not actually what we stand for. But nevertheless, the point I'm making is, had that engagement with the individual and put the issues on the table. I didn't get emotional, but I was very clear on the impact that it was having on both myself and the organizational agenda, and why it was an unsustainable position to be in, and try to look for what is your issue. Let's try and put it on the table. Let's try and address this. And nevertheless, being the response, understandably, you might expect that I got was one of denial up front. But nevertheless, the point is that, and it came with somewhat of an apology, and it'll not happen again. And the reality is, for me, however, what actually was the most impactful was 3 or 4 weeks later, I got a phone call out of the blue, and from that individual, and who just said, I just need to face up. You have been an object of my focus to undermine, and I'm not sure why, but I apologize unreservedly. Wow. And I was like, thank you. Wow. I accept unreservedly. And from that moment, the line was drawn. We didn't have to go back. So it was, but the point I'm making is, it's about how you take agency, for yourself. You don't have to rely on others. You can't always rely on your bosses. You can't always rely on the official system, but you can advocate for yourself, and you can do so with your dignity and respect intact. You don't have to get emotional. You don't have to get nasty, but you can get, you can advocate. And I think taking agency is such an underrated, so often it's people I watch so often in our organization and many others that I've been in, people expecting organizations to advocate for them, or to wait for the invitation. It's not coming. That's how I think you've got to lead. And I think the point for me is that in this world, leadership has got to be it's got to be a disposition, it's got to be something that you own, and it can't just be waiting for somebody in a position of authority to do it for you. So hopefully that's a valuable insight into the way I think about things.
It was, and that's great. Is there anything you think you articulated in that meeting with this individual that sort of made them reflect and come back? Because that's quite profound for them to come back a couple of weeks later and then also admit it. I mean, is there an approach? Because obviously some people take the finger, the blame, and, these things are nuanced. It's, what you did is phenomenal, really.
You know what I think, if nothing else, and I think, Ralf, you know me a little bit, I think at this stage, but look, I'm never going to tell you that I'm the answer to everything, because I'm so not that person. But let me tell you what I think I did do right. I think I leaned in with curiosity. I positioned the lay of the land as I saw it, but I leaned in with curiosity to ask the individual why. What was it? What were they getting at, right? Trying to understand their headspace, as opposed to going in and wagging my finger at the person and going, you did this. The reality is I was seeking to understand their why. What was it about me and or my approach, my voice, color of my skin? What was it, right? What was it? What is it? And with genuine curiosity, right? Yeah. So that I could find a learning in it. And if nothing else, I think that contributed to it. I think with some divine intervention, I think with some pause for reflection, and possibly that individual stepping back and contemplating what it meant for them, a whole combination of things happened that played out positively. But definitely, I think the humility and the curiosity, but also not abdicating for myself. It was important for me to state what was the issue and how it was impacting both professionally and me at a personal level, and then looking to understand why. And that curiosity, I think, is quite disarming, right? Because it means that the person who is so hell-bent on trying to be the aggressor is disarmed by your genuine, sincere desire to understand their perspective. I think that had something to do with it.
Definitely. Wow. Interesting. I mean, we spoke about culture earlier, and obviously the whole management sort of focus is, was it? It wasn't Drucker. It was Drucker that said, execution eats culture for breakfast. And then we spoke a little bit earlier, and you're like, that's rubbish. I was like, okay. Talk to me about that, because
you know what? Look, let me say that it's not entirely wrong. You're not wrong. Execution eats strategy for breakfast, right?
Yeah.
If you're not solving for execution, your strategy is merely a pipe dream. But from my perspective, I truly believe that culture is actually what eats execution and strategy for breakfast. And let me tell you why. I think that we live in a world where we've got our people are gripped with fear. I think that we are living in a hyper-competitive age where organizations are fighting for the customer, fighting for the next round of revenue, are fighting for market share. The reality is that competitiveness can be all-consuming. And the reality is that, for me, why culture can absolutely erode that is that if you don't create an environment where our people are less concerned about survival and more willing to go on the line and be vulnerable, to think creatively, to innovate, to take a risk, to do things more efficiently, more effectively, not just playing it safe. I think that we live in a world where you touched a little bit earlier on hope. Hope being, I believe it's an inherent human need. If you are hopeless for your future, you are not going to innovate. If you're going to block innovation, data, the use of technology advancements, AI, because you're going to protect your own interests. That for me is absolutely at its core a human innate need, and therefore what goes hand in hand with the ability to succeed in winning outcomes in an organization is to create an environment where people feel safe to make mistakes. Because if we remember that they're human, and if we remember that humans do make mistakes, it's that fear of failure, that fear of not getting it right first time, I think, means that people play it safe. They play in the safe zone. And that stifles innovation, stifles product development, it stifles decision-making, and frankly, it stifles execution. So the reality is that's why, for me, culture and the focus on culture and creating an environment conducive for people to thrive and bring of them themselves, where they aren't gripped by fear, that they aren't petrified of the mistake because that'll take them out of their roles. That is for me why culture is probably trumps execution.
So funny, because I was thinking about sport and how many sports people, they execute the same serve or whatever shot or golf swing, but when they got fear, they lock up.
Yeah.
And they can't actually perform, even they've been doing it for years. And so there's this fear of maybe the audience are winning or whatever. And so it's so true. But and
Very
I love
important.
that. I love that Ted Lasso sort of. I don't know if you've seen the Ted Lasso Netflix.
Yeah, I know
series.
about it. I haven't, unfortunately. No.
Oh, you're gonna love it. And so he's got a poster that he puts up in his team's dressing room, and it says belief. And I think that is so important, because without belief, you're not going to go and do the fearful things.
Yeah. Roger Federer, sorry to interrupt you there. He talks about something when he talks about his game and making a mistake, and playing a point and losing, right? And he's played his heart out. And he says, just, it's about resetting the mind and playing the next game as though it's your first, right? Play what's in front of you, not behind. And it's such a beautiful analogy for life, right? You can't, what you can expect is we will make mistakes. You just got to know that, right? But every single time you take another step forward or you start another point, play what's in front of you. It's a new opportunity. Don't be gripped with what's on the scoreboard, how many mistakes are behind you. You've got to play what's in front of you. So it's incredibly important, but that comes from creating psychological safety, right? And that psychological safety cannot be underestimated as an ingredient to culture for me. Anyway.
Yeah. I suppose on the flip side is that we all know of financial institutions, especially banks, have fiduciary duties that are quite onerous, and a mistake in a bank is a big challenge. And so, we're not just talking about some small organization that's doing some nice tech or whatever. This has real consequences. How do you marry that? Because to create this fearlessness, linking it with making sure that there's not a big picture challenge, that's a big responsibility.
Look, there are mistakes and they're mistakes, right? Dishonesty, fraud, right?
Yeah.
No go, right? There are just certain things that you've done it once, you're going to do it again, the reality is there is a line, right? So it's about contextualizing what is that for the organization, fraud, deception is absolutely cannot be tolerated, and there has to be a very hard line around that. But for the most part, a lot of people spend a lot of their days not necessarily focusing on, they don't necessarily handle money, but they are designing solutions for clients. And I'll give you an example, right? So in my world, we're driving a huge transformational agenda in the human capital space. And understandably, given the world that we live in, what are the roots of that? Technology, right? And whether we like it or not, the reality that we face is that the technology investment that was being advocated for by our partners was never going to unlock the vision that I had created around efficiency, effectiveness, and a shift in employee experience. And frankly, I just wish the team had the confidence to say, it's too complex, we don't know how to do it. So the reality is we made a false start on the investment in, or the pursuit of the investment in, certain technology solutions that was sold to me as the client. We're going to fulfill on the vision, and of course they never did, right? We have a new CIO who stepped into the environment 18 months ago, almost 2 years ago now. And what I love about what he has brought into that environment is to create learning circles. Because you can imagine the world we live in, how often we are making decisions based on imperfect information. We just don't know. And you have two choices, right? You have a choice to discipline people for making bad investments, selling to the client X solution, but actually it was never going to, in a month of Sundays, deliver against that. or you have the ability to say to them, let's slow down, let's turn this into learnings, right? And that for me is the power of getting it right, because it's about turning the failure into a learning. If you slow down long enough and you to spend time in it, not gloss over it, but slow down to roll around in the mess of what we've actually what is the failure? How did we get here? What would we do differently, right? Turning it into a point of reflection and curiosity, leaning into that, all of a sudden, and talking about it. Don't hide it. Don't sweep it under the carpet. Don't keep it away from people, but almost lead with it, right? Create environments where many, many more people are willing to sit around or come to participate in a learning circle where they hear about your vulnerabilities. They hear about leadership mistakes, little people mistakes, but what are the learnings, right? That is such a powerful unlock to creating psychological safety for people. And that is for me when I talk about creating, ungripping people from that fear, is about demonstrating when you've made a mistake, you're willing to talk about it, being authentic, because every single one of us make mistakes. And so it is about helping our people to understand what those are so they have the confidence to talk and learn from theirs.
Deb, definitely I get this authenticity from you, and I'm just trying to figure out how we can give it to more people. But I mean, we're talking about the CIO and technology, and we were talking earlier, we got young kids, and so we grip with the world moving into a DEI sort of world and what that meant, and now we have this new AI world, and what this means for organizations for the future. How are you, and it's so interesting how you're partnering up now with the CIO to create the technology and the digital transformation. Who would have thought it? 20 years ago, you're going to be HR leading digital transformation.
Absolutely.
With culture.
Yeah, absolutely, right.
So, I mean, what are the sort of some of the things that you guys are doing around this, I suppose, in some ways scary thing with AI and how it's been impacted? Because there's obviously advantages. There's so many opportunities that are coming from it, but there's obviously challenges, human challenges, moral challenges. Yeah.
You know what? Look, the reality is, for starters, I don't think it's even just a function of partnering with technology. Technology has changed the way my business is organized. In the world of HR, our centers of expertise, the way they were designed, how they worked 15 years ago as discrete, beautiful little centers of excellence, has changed. They now work in integrated ways. Why? Because technology stitches our value proposition together so differently today than what it did previously. So the reality is, I mean, it's changing the way we work, how we make decisions. It's a huge quantum leap from where we've come. And it does stretch us all the way from how we develop skills to the future. I mean, that's I think one of the biggest challenges that pretty much every organization faces today is how do we make sure that we have access to the skills that are going to keep us at the cutting edge of technology and tech advancement. And so that's been obviously quite central. And looking at the shift in our organizational profile, the skill profile has evolved dramatically. Even in the 7 years that I've been with Nedbank, we are shifting size, shape, composition of skills quite dramatically, and that's important. But equally, even how you embrace what technology can do for you, because it does mean that you have to really question and stay close to the use of technology to ensure that it does what it's intended to do, because it can otherwise be a threat to the way we make decisions. And so I'm a huge advocate for, the combination of, right? I think you've got to hire people with a strong moral compass who are able to design how we use AI, but go hard at AI. I'll give you an example where we're redesigning some processes of late in a particular country, and our people on the ground are saying, no, you need to design in the human to check the technology. Now, that's not going to be productive. But the reality is, so you've got to trust the technology that you're designing, but there is a moral compass around the decisions that you enable AI to take for and on your behalf. So it's an important coming together of the factors of this new world of work and understanding what it means for how you make decisions, how you work, and then making some of those trade-offs, right? So that sometimes have unpopular, taken on the face of it, an unpopular stance where, in essence, we are designing process that takes people out of the process. That's a very real phenomenon for people today. But nevertheless, it's here to stay. We can't not embrace it, but it is about making sure that you ready your people for those environments. You have them not caught unawares. You help them to reinvest in their skills well in advance of what happens to their roles, right? Otherwise, what you'll end up having is the dilemma of, well, I'm going to lose a whole lot of people in favor of a bot.
Yeah, I suppose we spoke about it earlier. I mean, there's people who are thinking, is my job safe in the future? And there's probably organizations or leaders thinking, is my company safe in the future? And as an individual or as a leader in an organization, what should they be doing to be looking at the future, looking at AI and all that it offers?
Yeah, look, the bottom line is that I think I've touched on this a little bit, Ralf. I think it's about authentically engaging your workforce around what that future looks like. The future is here, it's coming, change is evolving, and it's here to stay. I think that what our people, what I think pretty breaks my heart the most is people, a little bit like what you touched on earlier, sort of deer in the headlights. What does it mean for me? Like, I don't actually know, what is it actually going to mean to me and where am I going to land? And change resilience is something which I think has been often underestimated. I think we need to help our people to understand the pace of change, to understand that change is inevitable. And it is about a mindset, right? And then it is about also putting action behind that mindset. If you know that there is every possibility that a chunk of your work is going to change, digging your head in the sand, which I see a lot of, there is a large phenomenon of every workforce out there that people just think, if I close my eyes long enough and hope that they don't see me, I'm going to wake up 10 years from now and I'll still be okay. That's not going to be okay. Yeah. It is about reskilling. It is about retooling. It is about thinking about the art of the possible. It is about thinking about alternatives, and it's about going with them rather than getting stuck. And I think I had the privilege of meeting Adam Markle, who wrote Change Proof, and which is a phenomenal read. And he talks about the rip curl or the riptide, and and the world that we live in. You have people, if you're facing into an environment where change, you can either fight it, but it's going to exhaust you, and invariably it's going to spit you out, right? And you probably won't come out of it breathing. Or alternatively, you can go with it, but then you use your time and you use your mindset and your focus to reframe an alternative. And it is about, but if you get stuck and attached, change resistant, that fixed mindset is just, it's debilitating, and it is going to quickly wear you out. It is about helping people to understand. So it is, for us, the nature of what I think is incredibly important as an organization today is the responsibility to talk to people about the future and instill in them some hope for that future, because otherwise they are just going to fight it, and that's not going to be productive for you, and it's not going to be productive for the organization. So that's an incredibly important approach. I think that often is underestimated, the power of that in this very digital age that we live in.
I mean, we're coming to the end now, but if I think about what you said at the beginning, which is your big focus is to be a leader in organizations, but to unlock value in people. And working with your HR strategy skills is putting in plans and making sure that the culture is adapted and we can execute these things. If I think personally about some things that we implemented Salesforce a couple of years ago now, and for 4 years we paid a lot of money and got no benefit. And I tried everything, carrot stick, you name it, every book I could get my hands hold of, and it just wouldn't work the way I'd hoped it would work. And actually, I remember thinking to myself, geez, I can see that technology is important, what I need to do. And that's one of the reasons I started Africa Tech Week, is because I realized that we had some skills, which was media, eventing, but I wanted to get close to the people who were implementing technology. And it's funny because when COVID came, it was the meetings of those people that helped the organization survive COVID. And I wonder, you spoke earlier around how that execution is sometimes so very difficult to implement. And maybe you've got some pearls of wisdom for us about what is the best practice for implementing great strategies that is like bulletproof strategies where things often go wrong. What is the best way to implement them?
Well, if I had all the answers, it would be fabulous. Look, I think the reality is that it is about ensuring that you are engaging with the human and what's in it for them. I think that we are mere objects of our environment. Technology is here, and helping our people to understand what's in it for them. If they can't see what's in it for them, the motivation to succeed and adopt it and to go with that evolution of what tech brings is just, it's just going to continue to be, a tall order, and yet so often it does threaten the individual. So the pearls of wisdom, I think, is, if nothing else, it's about leaning in to understand why. Why is it not working? Why is my explanation for what's in it for you not working and resonating with you, right? I think that's incredibly important. I don't think we can underestimate that the power of dialogue in understanding that, getting to root cause is incredibly important. I think what that speaks to is to understand that every human that engages in our workforce has a heart, has a soul, and has a need. And it's about finding a common ground for those ambitions and what those individuals are doing in our organization, and trying to see how best we can marry the two. Easier said than done. In an environment where it would be so easy to just instruct a robot or a bot to do what we expect. But certainly, I think it is about leaning into the humanity of the situation and understanding what that actually tells us about what we need in order to move through this adversity.
Yeah, we've been working with Nedbank through COVID, but for many years now. And I can honestly tell you, the team and I love working with Nedbank. So those things, those culture things, it's so true. It's almost like we're family, feel part of the whole company. So that's amazing. I want to finish with one question though, and that is that if you had to put one message on a billboard for every HR leader in the country, what would you want to say?
I think what it would have to start with and end with is humanity, right? While you can be business first, and I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. Business first, because you're solving for outcomes that solve for the client, solve for the customer, solve for the shareholder. Do it with heart. Do it with heart. Because if people can, no matter, the road ahead is going to be hard. It's never going to be without its potholes. or maybe it's sometimes no lights along the way, as we well know in this country. But do it with heart, because I truly believe that helps you to navigate in what is uncharted territory.
Yeah, it's so important, that empathy part. Do it with heart, because the rest will take care of itself. It was so great to have you on the podcast, Deb, and I think Nedbank's in very safe hands with you leading its people.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
It was great talking to you, and I think South Africa is very lucky to have you back, by the way. And thanks GE for all the help.
Thank you very much for those kind words.